In her gripping debut novel, This Boy We Made, a memoir of motherhood, genetics, and facing the unknown, Arthur Taylor Harris describes the heart wrenching story of mothering a child who becomes inextricably ill and the challenges of navigating racism, parenting, traditions, and science in seeking to make him well. Wife, mother, and writer Taylor Harris joins me. Coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
In Taylor Harris's debut novel, she takes us on an unforgettable journey through the bureaucracy of America's healthcare system and lets us see firsthand the joys and pains of Black motherhood. She examines disabilities, race, gender, and class with both honesty and authenticity. Good morning and welcome, Taylor.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Wow. You know, I am a mother of a special needs child. So when I was reading, your book and the comments that have been written, the reviews of the book, and just learning about your story, so much of it, had brought back memories of, for me, in terms of things that we experienced as a family with our own son, Marty. So first of all, I just want to congratulate you and thank you for sharing your story, because I know firsthand, when you share such a personal story involving your child, that had to be pretty emotional for you as a mom to do that. So let's just start kind of at the beginning. Tell us what happened to your beautiful toddler, Christopher. You call him Tops. And this is a memoir. So this is your story. This is not fictionalized. This is your personal story.
Sure. So Toast was my second child, and just, my last name is Harris, and we just say all the Harris children are known for sort of their big cheeks and their laughs, their deep belly giggles. And so he started off just like my oldest had, my daughter had. And then around 22 months, he wakes up. He doesn't really make a sound. He's just sort of staring off into the distance. I'm like, maybe he's tired. I'll get an extra nap with him in the morning. When he wakes up, his heart is racing. He's just like gulping down water from his little water bottle, won't eat. I put him down to change his diaper thinking, okay, we'll get ready for the day. And he falls asleep again. And I just have this quick sort of look with my husband where I'm like, I don't think this is right. I think we need to call the doctor. And my background with someone with an anxiety disorder, I'm sort of always second guessing myself, not wanting to be the mom who overreacts. And so we made the call. They saw him almost immediately. And they weren't sure in the office if anything was wrong. And they drew some blood, thankfully, before we went home. And I got a call a few hours later, like, you guys live close to the ER, right? You need to take them in right away. We got the results. We're not even sure if they're right. And so we get rushed to the ER. It's the first time in my life where someone's like waiting for us when the doors open up. And what we find out is that in that doctor's office, his glucose level was at 27, and, sort of low normal would be something like 70-ish. And so from there on, I think, okay, we're going to figure this out, whether it's diabetes or, I know nothing about blood sugar at this point. They'll fix it and we'll go home. And what this becomes is sort of this unraveling of figuring out what his body is doing and how it's affecting his development. And we begin this very long and sometimes confusing search for answers.
And when did you decide that you wanted to share what had happened with your son in a book format?
It took a while to get to the book part. I think I've always been writing since I went to grad school for writing. And then as I graduated, I was pregnant with my first child, and I sort of thought, well, where does writing fit in? How do I mother? How does this all? As you know, we all are working to balance and figure out life, and so I just always sort of found a way to write, even if it was like silly stories about them as toddlers. And then I would, as this started developing with Toph, I would write columns. So I wrote a column about genetics for Catapult. I wrote a more humorous column for McSweeney's. And then I had this great friend, Nicole Chung, who's a writer and editor, and she kind of just would nudge me and she'd say, have you thought about, a proposal? Have you thought about putting this into a book? And again, part of that was that imposter syndrome of saying, maybe this story could be a book, maybe I could be an author. And then just slowly working on the proposal from that point. And then once I got the book deal with Catapult, then the real work started of, okay, like, great, someone's gonna publish this book for me. I just have to write it.
Right. Yeah. And I know at some point you and your husband took your son to see just a whole, slew of doctors, developmental pediatrician, cardiologist, endocrinologist, gastroenterologist. Did you ever get, satisfaction from seeing all these different doctors?
I think when I saw really good, curious doctors, I would leave with a little bit of satisfaction of, for instance, that gastroenterologist was sort of a friend of the pediatrician, and she didn't necessarily think something was wrong with his gut, but she said, I know this doctor, I know how he thinks, I want him to take a look and just and so when we did that, he checked him for things that he was pretty sure he didn't have. He had to do a cystic fibrosis sweat test because there was a small chance he could have something related to that. And so, yes, it was just marking off the boxes and canceling things out. But I think what's most important to me and that I've learned on this journey is having someone who really sits in those records with you and who is thinking with you. And that to us has been invaluable.
So I know in the book, you really expose the hostile nature. This boy, we made this incredible book with this story about your son. You really expose what Black mothers experience when they try to get health care, try to get, in your case, an accurate diagnosis for this very strange set of symptoms. Talk to us about that. Like, what did that look like?
I think I'm always concerned when I walk into, one of the examples, I walk into a doctor's appointment, not our regular pediatrician, someone who's sort of visiting with the team. And, I have, in one case, a list of symptoms that I want this doctor to take a look at. And she kind of like holds it out like this, like, I won't be needing that, and I feel like, like I did my work here. I'm trying to help. Like, my anecdotes from home are actually really important. And so in that case, your mind starts sort of whirling like, okay, is it because I've been told I look really young? Sometimes I was assumed at UVA, it was assumed that I was a college student and I was caring for these kids. Is it that I'm a stay-at-home mom? Is it that I'm Black? Is it that I'm a woman? And of course, none of these things are ever exactly solved because she's not going to say, this is why I treated you this way. So a lot of the burden for me is just that mental burden, the lack of imagination that other people have that affects, how I feel. And so I think, walking into an appointment like that, knowing I'm middle class, I have an advanced degree, my husband works at the university, and not being sure that any of these things matter. I really wanted to point that out in the book, that no matter what, you can be treated that way. And so my thought automatically goes to, like, goodness, what if you don't have health insurance? Like, what happens to people who don't have access to good care?
Yeah. Did you sense that your husband, was treated differently in these same settings?
I don't think it was treated differently. I think our personalities are different, and he's willing to, I talk about the line that he straddled, of even if our kid needs to be rushed to the hospital, if he has time, he's going to slip on a blazer, right? So he's following rules too. And he's being very careful too and saying, oh, hi, I'm, Dr. Paul Harris, a professor at, which is not how we usually introduce ourselves. But why I'm so grateful for Paul is he's the type to sort of push. He's going to be polite, but he's going to push, and he's not going to leave without, the best of care or without saying exactly what he needs. Whereas I can be a little bit more timid and a little bit more like, oh, okay, must be my fault. I did the wrong thing. Like, let us go in peace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many parents talk about it and have similar experiences when they're going to deal with different doctors and going into healthcare systems. Did you ever, I know you just said that you're more timid and Paul tends to be the more assertive one, but did either of you ever call any of these healthcare professionals out? Like, look, we don't feel like we're being heard. You're taking this list that I put a lot of time and effort in and you're dismissing it. And I think as the mom that this is very important information because, you guys are obviously super educated, probably more used to dealing with bureaucracies than the average person. Or did you even feel in that moment that you couldn't speak up in that way?
Oh, that's a great question. It is always, for me, it's that feeling of like, okay, you're treating, it's almost like a dentist saying something racist before they're going in your mouth. And you're like, okay, you're going to be treating us, so let me be careful. Sometimes we did say it in the moment, especially there was a time where we really needed Toph's, his glucose had dropped and we had all these orders from the doctors. We knew exactly what needed to be done. And a nurse almost gave him like an ice pop, which would have like just nullified the whole plan. And at that point we did say like, hold on a second. And thankfully a doctor came in and sort of overrode the plan. Also a lot in the education, in the IEP meetings I mentioned in the book, that was really our time at the table to, to share our experience and share why we were disappointed. But there were times where definitely it's almost like my tongue was caught in my mouth and I just sort of stared, like when one of the doctors said, why you gave your baby Tylenol for a fever under 102. This was my first child. And he said, where did you say you live again? And like, for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why he was asking that question in the moment. And I didn't speak up, and I could have said, well, why does that matter? But I just sort of rolled with it.
Yeah. So a big part of the book is also about just the familial relationships. Obviously you've talked about Dr. Paul, your husband, and I know as a special needs mom and doing the work that I do that oftentimes parents of special needs kids have the child having special needs brings them really close together. And I've experienced where others have, it's driven a wedge in them. How did you and Paul deal with, the stress of, having a child that needed so much medical attention and, this uncertainty around what was even going on with him?
I think, in some ways, the way our house was set up, it worked well, right? Because I was home with 2 toddlers and I could then take Tophs to 4 appointments a week, right? That could have been more of a burden if I had been working full time. We would have had to figure something else out. So in that way, we were set up, I think, to work well. I think what can happen with us is that because we can be so different in some ways and process things differently, we've learned as we've grown as a family in our marriage that we've got to talk about it. Because both of us, I'm like a deep feeler, but sometimes it takes me time to process, and I will just be sad, but I don't necessarily say, hey, I'm sad about what we're dealing with Tophs. A lot of times I didn't say that early on. And then Paul was working and he deals with it differently. And he was sad too, but he did not turn to me and say, hey, you know what? Thanks for all you're doing with Tophs, but I'm still really sad. And so as we've gotten further along, we've learned to have those conversations, obviously variations on that. But that was really important to know that, like, it's not just me. Like, I'm taking them to these appointments, but you're feeling this too, and you're not sure what to do.
What about a sibling relationship, another relationship that's often strained when there is a child that has special needs?
Mm-hmm. I often I don't know if worry is the right word, but I'll use it here. I worry a little bit about that. About, does my oldest feel sort of overlooked or not given enough attention? And there are these other ways in which they are such a gift to each other that I think my goodness, like once Paul and I move out of the way, hopefully we'll live a really long time. But once they grow up, like my hope is that they really take care of each other. And I've seen that already begin to start. And there's a quote in the book where my oldest, I'm explaining something to the kids, and Topes, I'm talking about the resurrection of Jesus, which I feel like is pretty important. And Topes says something like, okay, can we go to Target? And it's just like, I feel like, what did I just do? I wasted my time. And Elliot turns to me, she's still young, and she says, Mommy, it goes in his mind. Like, it stays there. You don't have to worry, and it's like this young child reassuring me. And so I think as siblings, they understand each other in ways that we can't. And we try to be a buffer when we need to, because I do think there are some sort of fights and explosions, especially as, my children range in age from 6 to 11. There's 3 of them. And so they butt heads a lot. And so we try to help them navigate that. But I think they have a bond that really, surpasses anything I could have hoped for.
Did you ever get to the diagnosis? I mean, that's the big thing. The whole book is about unraveling this mystery, because your son's symptoms don't fit nicely into any of the categories. I mean, when you talk about loss of speech, immediately I'm thinking, is he on the autism spectrum? You talk about some of the other sensory and auditory issues that he had. But then he had all these physical issues, which some kids on the spectrum will have some physical manifestations as well. But I think at some point you all are led to genetics as what may have been really driving some of these symptoms.
Yeah. So, I mean, long story short is we never get sort of an all-encompassing diagnosis. When I think of Topes at this stage, what I think is, the big diagnosis that we have physically, I would say, is epilepsy that developed as he got a little bit older. And we don't know if that's connected to anything that went on before in his life. But around 6, he started having some infrequent seizures, but scary nonetheless. And so he's treated for that. And that feels obviously not good in the sense of you want your child to have something, but it feels helpful. That's one thing I can go to the doctor and be like, he has epilepsy. Like, we know this. The other thing that we're still figuring out is sort of social situations and how does he process? I mean, processing is such a big piece. We were told most recently that there's not a lot you can do to speed it up, that is just a person's processing speed and that it might take time. So then, my mind goes to the classroom. And so what does that look like? What accommodations does he need? And where, as he becomes sort of this preteen boy, I'm really concerned with putting him in a situation where he's thriving and feeling confident.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the IEP process, and that's a process of meetings that happen in schools when kids have special needs. You get special education professionals involved. You have clinical folks involved. Like, what are they doing with him in school? Is he in a segregated classroom? Is he with his neurotypical peers? Like, what is that school experience like for him?
So we are at an interesting crossroads. We are deciding between a public school where he would have services and a private school where I will report to you in 6 months. I actually think he could really thrive in this space. Now, sometimes a public school will say, we can no longer meet your child's needs as they're written in this plan. So what we're going to do is pay for them to go to this private school. That is not the case with Topes. I mean, the thing is, nobody's going to look at him or look at his IEP and say, we can't do these things. But again, there are those intangibles where, do I think he could be in this school? Yes. Am I really curious about what might happen for him in this space, this smaller space? And do I really want him to fall in love with learning again? Yeah, he's at that point. We know sort of with special needs or not that Black boys tend to fall off around 4th grade. And he's at, I think, a really critical point of being on that verge of being like, school is not for me. I am not confident here. I always need more time. And I want to give us a year sort of in this smaller space, right, and just see if we see anything different.
Right. And you have gone through the IEP process, and the process can be incredibly supportive for some parents, or they feel like they're, being supported by the school districts, and others find those meetings to be intimidating and harassing. What has your experience been, you and your husband?
I've had both. So when we started off, his first IEP meetings, he was probably 3, and I described, a teacher named Miss Page, who he was in a self-contained special ed classroom, a preschool, and she was just so curious and engaging, and she would have the OT person come like swing him on a swing and then show him flashcards and see if that sped up any of his processing time or his ability to verbalize what he was seeing. And not everybody in the world can be a Page. I get that, and I've had other great teachers along the way. There are these cases I talk about in the book where it felt like somebody from Central Admin was sent to the meeting to sort of lay down the law. So in one case, we get a transfer IEP, and he's set to go to preschool 5 days a week and get services, and we move to this new county in the same state. And we're thinking, oh, easy, they'll sign off on this transfer IEP, no problem. We get there and they're like, well, we only want it in school 3 days a week, because we save our 5-day spots for kids with the most severe disabilities. And this is in a county with lots of money and lots of resources. And so it's not a thing of they can't take him. And so we fought and we got him in 5 days a week.
Wow, congratulations. And you're right. I mean, it is a fight. It's a struggle. And for many parents, they don't have the education, they don't have the resources, they don't even have the ability, sometimes just the sheer time. We got to go back to school. We got to go back to these meetings, multiple meetings that may be scheduled. And a lot of parents work, and they don't, have the ability to take off from work to attend these meetings. What do you want, Teo, for people who have kids who are completely healthy, don't have any issues with medical problems, don't have an IEP in their school? What are they going to get from your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the story that I love to talk about is just who my son is. And I don't think you have to have a child with special needs per se. But I think as part of this book is just looking at your child, like as a mother, or if you're a teacher. When I say mother, I'm using the term, more expansively to say mothering or caring for someone, right? Which many of us do. And just seeing, that spark, like what is so beautiful about Toast is that he's so funny, and he loves dancing, he loves music, he watches TV for the ads. He doesn't care what's on, he just wants to see the ads and repeat them. And so what I didn't want lost in this book, even though it's about systems and racism and education, I didn't want him lost. And I think so many people reading the book will be able to identify with this, whatever they're navigating. Like, you are mothering this child, and this child is so incredible. And you don't, you don't have to lose that, right? No matter what battle you're fighting, no matter who you're up against, just reminding that child that they are a gift, and the fact that we get to care for them is a gift.
Have things gotten better, in terms of your visits to doctors or your school meetings? Do you feel like, you've grown a lot? Obviously, you've learned a lot. You've learned all the lingo that's used in IEPs. There's, a lot of acronyms, a lot of codes, a lot of shorthand, and I'm sure you have mastered it by now. So, I mean, are you feeling less pressure, less anxiety about, your son?
I wish I could tell you that I was. I really think this preteen crossroads is stretching me in new ways. So this school decision, we are, if you know us as a family, we are sort of, not in a judgy way, but we tend to be public school people. We're going to support the public school. We're going to, send our kids. We're going to advocate. We're going to be there. That's sort of been our bent. And this idea of, wait, what if he's a better fit over here, has really kind of blown my mind open. I mean, public preschool, that special ed classroom, I feel like saved our lives when I didn't know what was going on with him. And it felt like I can take him to this classroom and he is safe and he has friends and he's growing. Mm-hmm. So to sort of leave that public school space for a private option is something that I'm really wrestling with.
Wow. Okay. Other than that school issue, any other concerns as he is growing? I mean, it sounds like he's flourishing. And, how is he doing?
He's doing.
Go ahead.
Okay. He's doing great. So his seizures are under control now with medication, and the hope is just as he continues to grow that we just adjust the medication and that they'll be under control forever. There might even be a chance that he outgrows this. There's some epilepsies with childhood that they're just within childhood. Other than that, he is still sort of on a lower simple sugar diet because his glucose tends to be stable that way. So that's some advice we got from the Cleveland Clinic and a dietitian there. Again, as he grows older and can advocate for himself, we're starting to loosen the reins on that a little bit to see, like, can he have a cookie? Because it is hard for a 10-year-old boy to always have to have, there are lots of options nowadays, which are great, but it's a little bit hard for him to be in these settings where he's always like, let me check the grams of sugar. So if he doesn't need that, we want to free him from that. But I have caught a few high blood sugars after he's had more sugar. So there's still something with his body where if he gets too much, you still see it shoot up. And what we don't want is for the low to come in after that.
Do you think doctors got to this diagnosis of epilepsy fast enough? Because, I don't know how doctors diagnose epilepsy, but it seems like you went through a very kind of circular process to end up with something that I would imagine most pediatricians would have familiarity with.
I think what complicated it for him is he having these. So the first time we took him to the ER and we had found out his blood sugar was 27, one of the things my husband overheard them scream and as they were hooking him up and stuff was, why isn't he seizing? Well, at that point he'd eaten a little something, so his blood sugar was more stable. But the point is at 27, you should be seizing. And so a kid with sort of an undiagnosed blood glucose issue, they start having seizures. He would always seize at dawn, like 5 o'clock in the morning. And so the assumption then is that perhaps his blood glucose level is dropping and causing him to seize. So I think that threw us off for a while. And then once I started being able to get normal blood glucose levels as he's seizing, which is not easy or fun, we started to say, oh, okay, so as far as we know, this isn't a metabolic issue. This is epilepsy. And even now when we see neurologists at CHOP in Philadelphia, his epilepsy does not fit a certain subtype. So he's still very toast in the fact that he presents in these ways that are hard to diagnose and define.
Okay. What are the fears? Does he talk to you about, Tope have any fears that he has as he's becoming, this teenager and soon to be a young adult? He knows, I would imagine, that he has this kind of difficult to describe disorder. How much have you guys talked to him about it?
We've talked some, but what's interesting that I learned a lot from watching him and listening to him. And what he told me, I would get on him sometimes, like, Coach, you've got to read, like, get a book, you have to read. I don't like reading. But then he would say, well, sometimes I do read. There's this program at school where you can read online. And he said, I picked out a book about epilepsy. And he's like, I'm reading about epilepsy, And so, again, Tope's time and time again surprises me and teaches me a lot. He doesn't feel uncomfortable really among really anyone. He's comfortable in his own skin. And for me, it's more as a mom trying to set him up well to thrive.
So he has no concerns. He's like, I'm just a happy-go-lucky kid. Sometimes I like to read, sometimes I don't like to read, but he's like, fine.
Yeah. He's addicted to Alexa. He really loves, he's like, Alexa, play Doja Cat. And, there's one, he learned one Doja Cat song and then another one comes on that Alexa chooses and it's got some words that maybe we don't use around the house. And then he looks at me and he's like, Alexa, stop. And so all Topes really needs is like a dance floor and an Alexa, and he's really good to go.
Wow, love to hear it. I'm glad he's doing well.
Thank you.
So, if the healthcare profession or members that work in the healthcare profession read your book, what do you want them to do? Like, what do you wish were different about that experience that maybe could make it a little easier for the next parent that comes into an emergency room or goes into a doctor's office?
Yeah, I think there are people I point to in the book who are just great examples of being with the patient. And I know that doctors have schedules, so I'm not saying, take an hour out or be the chaplain at the hospital. I don't expect them to play all of the roles, but as much as they're able to sit with and be with and accept the anecdotes that are coming in, even though they might not be scientific, that they matter. And I feel like the doctors who did that, the genetic counselors who did that, they were able to help us, and maybe not help us in the sense of give us all the answers that we wanted, but I was able to trust them. And when something still comes up, I text or email or call those people who are willing to sit with us in this unknown.
And what about moms? What do you want them to take away from this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading this right now. I'm reading Essential Labor by Angela Garbs, and I'm reminded both of all of the work that we do to make the world and this country and this world run. And one thing I'm learning from Garbs that I hope readers would also see in my book is just how worthy that role is, like how worthwhile it is to be caring for this, for in my case, this boy who I love and just want so deeply to know. A lot of my search for Toast was, yes, to keep him alive and make sure he's safe, right? But also just like, am I seeing you? That was sort of at the core of this search. And so that's something I'd love to come back to, just like a mother's love for their child.
What's on the horizon for you, Taylor? Is part 2 of this book, or continuing to share these kinds of stories as Topes grows up?
No, that's a great question. Part of this publishing process, it's been sort of nice to take a step back and say, okay, what else do I want to write about? Also, one of the tweets that was my favorite was someone who recently read the book and said, okay, I want an update in 10 years. And I don't know if that'll be a book or just an essay or something else, or maybe Topes will write it himself. But I want an update too,
That is fantastic. Well, it sounds like he is doing phenomenally well, and that has to do so much with the work that you and your husband have done, because healthy kids typically have really healthy parents. So, kudos to Dr. Paul and his blazer for putting that blazer on and going into those, white spaces and doing what he needs to do to get the help for his son. I have a lot of respect for both of you, and just keep us posted. We'd love to follow your son and see what happens with him, because it sounds like he has an amazing future ahead of him.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Thank you for sharing your book. I just want to make sure we show it. I want to keep showing this book because, as we talked about, this boy we made, healthcare professionals, parents, people who are thinking about becoming parents, this is a book for you. I want to make sure you pick it up because it's such a powerful story. And again, thank you so much, Taylor, for joining me.
Thank you.
I want to thank Taylor Harris for sharing her family with us and sharing her son and his journey, his wellness journey, because that's what it is. I mean, he's an incredible young boy, which she told us about, and this memoir, her sharing her story of her son and her family. This boy we made. I love the title. I think it's an incredible title, and I think it just speaks to, as she said, what a gift from God it is to be the mother, in her case, to be the mother of a young boy with special needs. And as a parent myself of a special needs kids, I know how incredible this journey is. I know how emotional it can be. I know how difficult it can be. So I'm always encouraged when I see other moms who share their story. If you follow me, I share my story about Marty all the time. So I am just wishing Taylor and her family the best as they go on this journey and they follow Topes as he, becomes a preteen and then on to a teenager. Lots of adventures in store for them, and hopefully in the next 10 years or maybe even 5 years, she'll give us an update in terms awareness of what's happening to him. So make sure you pick up a copy of this book. We want to support mothers like her, authors like her, people who are willing to share their stories, because there's so much to learn. Like we talked about the healthcare profession, learning how to be better listeners when parents come in and tell you things that are happening with their kids. I know doctors go to school for, I don't know, 7-8 years, or, combined with their residency, and you guys are the expert. You women are the experts, but nobody knows more about a child than their parents. So when parents come into a medical examination or go to a hospital, and if they've taken the time, like Taylor said she would do, to write notes and to keep a log and a journal, please read them, because they have important stuff in there about the kids that you'll never know in a 10 or 15-minute examination. So lots of kernels of knowledge and wisdom in her book. Just some words to live by before I get out. There are two types of pain, one that hurts you and the other that changes you. And I can tell you, speaking from experience, the kind of pain you feel as a parent when you learn that your child has special needs, it definitely can hurt, but it can also change you. And in Taylor's case, it changed her in an incredibly powerful way, because it has made her an advocate, not only for her son, but for little boys like her son all over this country. Be safe out there, and remember, we're all in this together.